May 8, 1846. The Mexican-American War has just begun. Captain James Hartwell of the U.S. Cavalry receives orders that will change everything. Ride to the Rio Grande and secure the northern crossing before Mexican General Mariano Arista arrives with 3,000 soldiers. Hartwell has 150 men. He has 1 hour. Hartwell was a 34-year-old officer from Virginia. Practical, honorable, but not a reckless man. He understood the odds. But he also understood that if Mexico took the crossing, the war would be lost before it truly began. Hartwell called his officers together. Lieutenant Samuel Clay, a young man of just 22, stepped forward first. "Sir," Clay said, "we cannot hold this position against 3,000 men. We should fall back and regroup." But Hartwell shook his head. "We will not retreat, but we will not fight here in static defense. We hit them fast, hit them hard, and we destroy their supply lines. If we can slow Arista down, reinforcements from San Antonio will arrive." The plan was unconventional. Instead of defending the crossing, Hartwell would attack the Mexican supply column approaching from the south. If he could disrupt their logistics, Arista would be forced to slow his advance. It was a cavalry tactic from another era, bold, dangerous, and almost certainly suicidal if anything went wrong. At 0400 hours, the cavalry mounted up. Horses' hooves echoed in the pre-dawn darkness. Lieutenant Clay rode beside Hartwell, checking his rifle one last time. They had 10 minutes before they would encounter Mexican scouts. At 0415, Mexican sentries spotted them. 3 scouts on horseback appeared on the ridge above the trail. Hartwell didn't hesitate. He raised his saber and screamed, "Charge!" The 150 men responded instantly, accelerating their horses to a gallop. The Mexican scouts turned to flee. They never made it. Hartwell's cavalry overtook them in seconds. The first shots of the engagement cracked the morning air. But Hartwell didn't stop to celebrate. He pressed forward toward the supply column, now visible 2 miles ahead. General Arista's supply column was massive, 40 wagons carrying ammunition, food, and medical supplies. But it was lightly defended. Only 200 Mexican soldiers guarded it, spread thin across half a mile of terrain. They had no idea that Hartwell was about to hit them with everything he had. At 0430, Hartwell's cavalry crested the final ridge. The supply column lay directly below them. Hartwell gave the signal. What happened next was absolute chaos. Hartwell's cavalry charged down the slope at full gallop. The ground shook. Dust exploded beneath the horses' hooves. Rifle fire erupted, Americans and Mexicans exchanging shots at close range. The first wagon erupted into flames. Lieutenant Clay led a squadron directly at the wagon line. His men set fires with torches, destroying supplies as fast as they could light them. Ammunition wagons exploded with tremendous force, sending debris spinning through the air. The Mexican defenders tried to counterattack, but they were overwhelmed by sheer velocity and chaos. The engagement lasted only 12 minutes. Hartwell lost 8 men and had 23 wounded, but the Mexican supply column was completely destroyed. All 40 wagons were burned or captured. General Arista's army had just lost 80% of its supplies. "Regroup the men. We head back to the Rio Grande crossing immediately. They'll be coming for us now, and we need to be ready for them there." The cavalry didn't celebrate. They collected their wounded and began the urgent ride back north. General Mariano Arista was furious when he discovered the destruction. His army was now without adequate supplies to conduct a sustained offensive. But he had a massive numerical advantage. 3,000 soldiers to Hartwell's 142 remaining men. He decided to pursue the Americans and end this threat once and for all. By 0700 hours, Hartwell's cavalry reached the Rio Grande crossing. They immediately set up a defensive position using natural terrain and hastily constructed barricades. Hartwell knew that Arista would arrive within hours. He had to make every bullet count. At 0900 hours, Mexican scouts appeared on the southern horizon. Within an hour, the full Mexican army was visible. 3,000 soldiers in disciplined columns, infantry and cavalry mixed, with artillery pieces being dragged by teams of horses. They outnumbered Hartwell 20-1. General Arista halted his army 500 yards from the American position. He could see the barricades, the 2 cannons, the desperately thin American line. He believed the battle would be quick. He was wrong. The Mexican artillery bombardment lasted 20 minutes. Shells exploded around the American position. Barricades were shattered. Dust and smoke filled the air. But Hartwell's men held their fire. They waited. Hold your fire. Hold your fire. They're wasting ammunition on empty positions. When the infantry comes, that is when we strike. Make every shot count. Hartwell's voice remained calm, almost eerily composed, despite the explosions around him. At 0930, the Mexican artillery ceased fire. The smoke cleared. Then came the attack. 1,500 Mexican infantry soldiers charged across the desert toward the American lines in disciplined ranks. When the Mexican infantry came within 200 yards, Hartwell gave the signal. The two American cannons fired simultaneously. The effect was devastating. 30 Mexican soldiers fell in the first volley. The Mexican attack faltered but continued forward. At 100 yards, Hartwell shouted, "Fire!" The American rifle line erupted. A sheet of flame and smoke poured from the barricades. Hundreds of Mexican soldiers were cut down in seconds. The attack collapsed. Survivors turned and ran back toward their lines. In 15 minutes of fighting, the Mexicans lost 400 soldiers killed or wounded. Hartwell lost 3 more men and had 12 additional wounded. The Mexican attack had been stopped cold. Arista was shocked. But Arista wasn't finished. At 1100 hours, he ordered a second assault. This time, he sent his cavalry 500 Mexican cavalry soldiers in a massive charge designed to break through the American lines. Hartwell watched the Mexican cavalry charge. He had prepared for this. He had arranged the American cavalry in a hidden position behind a ridge, out of sight. As the Mexican cavalry approached, Hartwell whispered to his second-in-command, "Now." The American cavalry burst from behind the ridge like a thunderbolt. They hit the Mexican cavalry charge from the side, a perfect ambush. The Mexican cavalry formation shattered into chaos. In the confusion, Mexican cavalry units turned to fight each other. Orders broke down. The Mexican commander lost control of his cavalry assault. Hartwell pressed the advantage, pushing deeper into the Mexican formation, fragmenting it further. The Mexican cavalry broke. They retreated in disorder, leaving 200 of their soldiers dead on the field. Hartwell had lost 8 men in the cavalry engagement, but the psychology of the battle had shifted. The Americans had stopped 2 major assaults. They were becoming legends. General Arista called a halt to further direct assaults. He could see that frontal attacks weren't working. He decided to change tactics. He would bombard the American position with artillery and hope that reinforcements could arrive before Hartwell's supply of ammunition ran out. From 1200 to 1600 hours, the Mexican artillery resumed bombardment. This time, the fire was calculated and methodical. The Mexican gunners aimed at the American defensive line, trying to destroy the barricades and kill defenders. Hartwell's men huddled under fire, conserving ammunition, waiting for reinforcements that hadn't arrived. At 1600 hours, American sentries spotted dust on the northern horizon. Relief cavalry from San Antonio was finally approaching. 350 mounted soldiers, led by Captain Robert E. Lee. They had ridden 120 miles in 24 hours. Hartwell's defense had bought enough time. When General Arista saw the American reinforcements approaching, he realized that continuing the assault would be futile. He had lost over 600 soldiers and achieved nothing. The destroyed supply column and 2 failed assaults had cost him dearly. Arista made the decision to withdraw. By 1630 hours, the Mexican army had begun its withdrawal. Hartwell watched from his position as the massive Mexican force moved south and away from the Rio Grande crossing. He had done it. Against impossible odds, with 142 remaining soldiers and 2 small cannons, he had stopped 3,000 Mexican soldiers. Captain Robert E. Lee rode to Hartwell's position and saluted. "Sir, we received reports of your defense at the Rio Grande. The entire Northern Command is talking about it. You've become a legend." Hartwell smiled wearily. "We did our duty, Captain. Nothing more. These men," he gestured to his exhausted soldiers, "they fought not for glory but to defend their country. That is what matters." Hartwell turned to survey his defensive position one final time. The Battle of the Rio Grande, as history would call it, lasted 14 hours. Hartwell's 142 men had killed or wounded over 600 Mexican soldiers. The Mexican army, despite its massive numerical advantage, had been stopped and forced to withdraw. It was one of the most shocking tactical victories of the Mexican-American War. Hartwell was promoted to major and received a formal commendation from the Secretary of War. But the promotion came with a cost. The young officer who charged into the Mexican supply column, the strategist who positioned his cavalry perfectly in ambush, the leader who held a thin line against overwhelming odds, that man never fully recovered from the stress and trauma of battle. Hartwell continued to serve in the Mexican-American War through its conclusion in 1848. He participated in the invasion of Mexico City and was there when the American flag was raised over the National Palace. But he never forgot the Rio Grande, never forgot the men who died defending it. In 1849, Hartwell left active military service and returned to Virginia. He lived quietly for the rest of his life, rarely speaking about his accomplishments. He died in 1877, at the age of 65, honored by his family but largely forgotten by history. Yet his victory at the Rio Grande remained in the records, a testament to courage, leadership, and the will to refuse surrender. Today, military academies study the Battle of the Rio Grande as an example of defensive innovation and leadership under extreme pressure. Hartwell's decision to attack the supply column instead of passively defending the crossing, an unconventional tactic, changed the dynamics of the entire engagement. His example taught generations of officers that sometimes the boldest defense is a strategic offense. The 142 men who fought at the Rio Grande that day, clerks, farmers, shopkeepers, and career soldiers, became part of military legend. Not all of them survived the war. Of the 1942 defenders, 23 were killed in subsequent campaigns, and many more carried wounds for the rest of their lives. But they had proven something fundamental, that discipline, courage, and intelligent leadership could overcome even the most daunting numerical disadvantages. The Mexican-American War ended in 1848. With the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the United States gained 525,000 square miles of territory, roughly 55% of what is now Mexico. The victory at the Rio Grande had been a crucial moment in that war, buying time for American reinforcements and breaking Mexican momentum at a critical juncture. But for Captain Hartwell, the true victory was not territory or national glory. It was the knowledge that he had led his men with wisdom and courage, that he had made the right decisions under pressure, and that he had refused to accept defeat even when defeat seemed inevitable. That was the victory that mattered to him. This is the story of Captain James Hartwell, the man who defended the Rio Grande crossing against 3,000 soldiers and changed the course of the Mexican-American War. A man who understood that the greatest victories are won not by overwhelming force, but by superior strategy, unwavering courage, and the willingness to do what is right. Even when the world seems aligned against you, his legacy remains a timeless reminder that one person, with conviction and intelligence, can achieve the impossible.